participatory grant making and how to reach communities. We appreciate that, not covering everything that falls within the toolkit, but we hope that you will take away something today, and we're very happy to follow up with everyone and anyone who's interested in starting your journeys beyond today as well. If we've got any time at the end, I think we're going to be quite squeezed, but we've got some time, might have some time for some questions, but if not, please do pop questions in the box at the bottom, and Dan will try and get back to people as we go along, but if not, we'll take those away and get back to individuals at the end of end of the session. And obviously the session's being recorded as well, so that will be shared, and we'll also share some links to sort of our resources and the toolkit afterwards as well. So I'm going to try and play a video. I was just saying I've spilled coffee on my laptop this morning, which is never helpful when you're doing a webinar, but I'm hoping that this will play. So it's just a little bit about Camden Giving for those who are new to us. So I hope that it will tell you a little bit more about the work that we do in a nutshell.
Camden Giving is a different kind of charity. Our mission is to end local poverty and inequality in Camden, and we do that by empowering the local community to decide how to spend the money we raise. Camden has the second widest wealth gap in the country. People with money living side by side to people who are struggling, and not having enough money makes it more likely that you'll have poor health, an increased risk of knife violence, and less power to change things around you. We believe there needs to be a better way of creating equality in communities. So together with our supporters, communities, and the charities we fund, we are shifting the power within Camden. We are a participatory funder. This means the people we want to help, people in Camden experiencing poverty, homelessness, violence, or inequality, are the same people who should decide which charities get funding from Camden Giving. We recruit people experiencing inequality in Camden, provide them with support and training, and pay them for the important work that they are doing. They form community panels who decide which charities should receive grants from Camden Giving. It means that charities who have the best solutions to local issues receive more funding, regardless of how good their fundraising campaigns are. Our community panels give grants to a wide range of local charities, like boxing clubs for at-risk young people, social clubs for isolated older people, and night shelters for people who are homeless. The people and businesses who give to Camden Giving do so because they want to give power to people who are experiencing inequality, either because of disability, racial injustice, gender, or personal circumstances. The money they give has a greater impact because it is spent by people with a deep understanding of issues their communities face. Camden Giving, working together for a better Camden.
Okay,
Camden.
There we go. Just try and do it again. So just to follow on from that, so Camden Giving, and we're also one of the 20+ place-based giving schemes in London and part of the London's Giving Network, which is a growing movement that's taken hold across London to empower people, businesses and organisations to come together to build a better borough for everyone. So London funders have been really key in supporting the development of place-based giving schemes like Camden Giving across the capital, and we've now partnered up to create the Participatory Grant Making Toolkit, which we're really excited to share with you all today. So some of you might be quite new to participatory grant making, some might be exploring it already, but it's a really diverse approach. Like, it's not a one-size-fits-all thing, so I think it would be really helpful if I just do a little bit of a recap as to what sort of participatory grant making is and the different styles of it, so you can sort of go away and reflect on potential models and approaches that might work for your organisations. So participatory grant making is a really lovely buzzword that we're hearing a lot in the funding community at the moment, but it isn't a new concept. It's been around for quite a long time, but with the sort of widening inequalities that we're seeing across the globe over the last few years, many communities are calling for much more power and more control over how money is generated and distributed, to address the injustices that they are experiencing. But there's also a strong desire that we're seeing across the funding community as well to do more to create fairer societies, and we've seen a real significant rise in interest in delivering participatory grant making as a way to democratise money. And I think just the fact that 56 of you are here with us today is a really amazing thing, and we are really excited to see where we can support with your journeys as we move forward. There are lots of different definitions of participatory grant making as well, but as a concept, it's about devolving decision-making powers to those who are directly affected by inequalities and are impacted by the sort of funding decisions that we as grant makers are making. The communities often have direct experience of the issues that are being addressed as well, and have the solutions for what's needed to really shape and change the deep-rooted issues that we as funders are trying to overcome as well. But also these are the people that are really likely to participate in the benefits of the decisions that are made as well. There are also lots and lots of different ways to approach participatory grant making, and even within sort of Camden Giving, it's not a fixed and static process. It's more of a set of values, and in practice, there are lots of different ways of doing participatory grant making. And I think it's important to sort of reflect on what the best approach for you right now is. Just on that, the amount of sort of participation is can vary quite a lot, and organisations can sort of embed it at very different stages of their process, and within different parts of their organisations as well. Some might be doing smaller pockets of participatory grant making just within one particular fund. Others might have someone with sort of lived experience of the challenges that they're trying to tackle on sort of their decision-making panels. Others might recruit, into their sort of advisory boards or into their, trustee boards as well, to help have that representation at sort of leadership level as well. There are also many different models of decision-making within sort of participatory grant making. There's a model called rolling collective model, which is where all the grant recipients who are involved in the process are both sort of receiving and giving funding are the ones who then make decisions on the next round of funding. And the more traditional style, I suppose, that Camden Giving use is called the representative sort of community panels, so where we're working with communities with lived experience of the issues that we're trying to overcome, who make decisions for our funding. So for us, because we're a place-based funder, we're looking at inequality within a specific place. So it only makes sense for us to work with people who are living in those communities and being impacted by sort of what happens in the local area. But also making sure that we're working with the assets that exist here, from our donors to the employees and to our communities as well. So how we work is that we recruit, train and pay people with that lived experience of local issues such as poverty and youth safety, and they decide how the pot of funding should be spent to overcome those particular issues. So for example, if we're funding youth safety projects, we ask young people with experience of youth violence what projects that they need and their peers need to be safe and to be safe in their communities. But they're involved in much more than just sort of the grant making decisions at Camden Giving, and this is part of, like I said, it's not a static process. We've gone from just having people on our panels to actually embedding sort of more participatory elements in our approaches as well, from now influencing sort of our grant strategy to influencing our funding criteria. They carry out participatory reporting and much more, and a lot of this you can sort of have a look at in more detail in our toolkit as well. The reasons why we do participatory grant making and why we're sort of pushing for this sort of style of grant giving to happen beyond just sort of Camden and London, is that people with the lived experience have a really deep understanding of the complexities and intersections of inequality. Residents are really aware of how needs on the ground are changing over time and how multiple sort of issues affecting communities can change. But also organisations often compete for the same funding, and that often excludes the sort of very small niche sort of grassroots organisations that we tend to be supporting more through our work as well. It also allows residents to have a stake in their own community. Community panellists are really intrinsic to the work that we do, much like our donors and volunteers. We can't operate without them. So that means that everyone plays a role in creating sort of a fairer place within Camden. And because of that, we've seen a lot of people who are often maybe not engaged in forms of, civic and sort of democratic engagement, actually be involved more after they've given grants with us as well. But also it builds a lot of learning skills and new networks for people, for many communities that they otherwise might not typically be able to be involved in as well. It provides economic participation for people who are maybe unemployed or underemployed, which is really why we pay the London Living Wage for people to be able to participate, and for them to develop new skills, for work, and for, to build social capital as well. So that's, a little bit about participatory grant making. Moving on, so getting stuck into sort of the toolkit. Camden Giving is the UK's largest participatory grant maker, and our knowledge of participatory grant making comes from action over the last sort of 6 years. Communities have been involved in sort of how we operate and how our funding interacts in the borough, and we've awarded over £6 million with 200 residents working in Camden. And each time we've awarded a grant, we've done something differently, which means that we've built up knowledge of participatory grant making, and we're using that to sort of shift power across the funding sector. So we established the Toolkit in 2021 in partnership with London Funders as a free resource that encapsulates a lot of the learning that we've experienced over the last 6 years as participatory grant makers, and that focuses on the sort of practicalities of how to sort of implement participatory grant making for organisations interested in the approach. We recently updated the toolkit as well this year to incorporate further learnings as well from participatory grant making over the last 2 years. We learned a lot during sort of the pandemic and with the cost of living crisis as well, which we have sort of made sure that we included in the toolkit as well. So for us, looking at sort of participatory grant making, there's so much to go on, like to do, and I think for us it's really going back to sort of, okay, where do we start with participatory grant making? I know it can seem like a bit of a minefield, with not knowing where to get started and where to begin, but the foundations of participatory grant making really are built on 4 key values that we can see on the screen today. So I think if you begin with these values, you're off to a good start. So bringing these values to life at sort of Camden Giving involves sort of making sure that we have flexibility within our approaches. So that means that we sort of change the way that we work to suit the needs of individuals and to accommodate for the sheer diversity of people involved in our participatory grant making. Many panelists lead really busy and sometimes quite chaotic and complex lives, and we really should accommodate for that, so that no one is left out of this work. I think it's our responsibility as funders to be able to change our processes to make sure that people aren't left out of decision making. The burden shouldn't be on our communities. There are lots of factors that we need to sort of accommodate for, to make sure that participation is equitable. And that's sort of, looking at things like accessibility support for disabled residents, but also providing alternative ways for people who are balancing multiple commitments, whether that's sort of caring responsibilities or working multiple jobs, to be able to participate. Just for example, it's really rare to have a panel where everyone has the same schedule. So we run extra catch-up sessions for people who can't attend the main sessions and the training sessions. We've also sort of started doing more hybrid sessions for those who aren't able to join in person for whatever reason that might be. And our panelists really take their roles seriously because they're given grants that are so close to home. It really adds a sense of sort of urgency to their work. And we've had people who have joined with, their children. People have joined us while cooking dinner, even from hospital as well. So I think for us that we'll always find a way for people to be able to participate in the work that we're doing. And I think a really important thing is as well making sure that there's a budget in place for all the unexpected things that we have had to accommodate for, essentially. And I know Dan will talk a little bit more about this shortly when he talks about how we support panels in a bit more detail. The second value is all about respect, and the knowledge of the communities and the people that we are working with is the most valuable knowledge that we can be using, and we really need to make sure that we're respecting it because it leads to better outcomes for everyone involved. There are 2 ways that we do this. So the first one is respecting the person. sometimes we hear from, funders or board members that community members don't have the right skills or experiences for making decisions on funding, and therefore it's sometimes assumed that they will make bad decisions. But this really sort of undermines and undervalues their abilities and, and their knowledge as well. Like, to us, they are the experts, and participatory grant making is all around valuing experience of inequalities and the issues that we're trying to address over sort of professional and learned experience. And for us, we know that people can't learn lived experience, but can learn other parts of the roles, and that's where Camden Giving come in to make sure that we are supporting individuals to make decisions, and we can help by supplementing sort of their learnt experience and knowledge as well. The second point is around respecting the process as well. We really don't think there are occasions where participation isn't important, and we often, will talk to our donors about accepting grants or not accepting grants. And obviously, for us, if our donors aren't sort of living and breathing, the work that we do as well, sometimes, that will also mean that maybe this isn't the right partnership for us, and we don't want to be spending money and working with people who maybe aren't sort of respecting the core values that we live and breathe through participatory grant making either. Justice is the sort of third pillar of core values that we need to be implementing through participatory grant making, because the people who our funding is essentially benefiting should be those who have control over the things that are affecting them. Money can benefit a lot of groups more than others as well, and as a result, some groups of people can have sort of a disproportionate ability to decide how money is donated and distributed to charities and sort of grassroots organisations, and that ultimately means they're making decisions on which charities thrive and which ones fail as well. So we really start from the position that acknowledges the unfairness of the system that we are sort of operating in as funders, and for us, we're on a journey around sort of achieving justice for communities that we're part of. A few ways that we do this, which I think is important, is as well looking at often communities who are giving so much, through participatory grant making are often conditioned to say thank you for things that should never have been withheld from them. And for us, like, we don't think it's their role, they don't have to go out and, say thank you to donors. Like, for us, that's something that we do, but it's not something that we ask our community panelists to be part of. Another thing is around having sort of complete autonomy over their decisions as well. So our trustees have never turned down sort of a panel decision, and for us, that's a really important thing, that when we're saying, okay, you as community members have full control over which decisions are made, that's something that sits with them, and sometimes for us, we do have to sort of obviously play a role and make sure that we are giving feedback to people who we're turning down for funding as well. But at the end of the day, we trust in the decisions that our panelists are making as well. The final thing, the final value, is all around evolution. So we haven't found all of the answers, and we're not doing participatory grant making perfectly, but we're doing our best to keep evolving sort of our practices and improving the work that we are doing to make sure that we're doing the communities that we work with justice as well. We think and we're enjoying challenging sort of this great status quo and sort of breaking away from the normal ways of doing things. And I think participatory grant making is all about, taking some risks, trying new things, learning from them and evolving. Like I said, we've been doing this for about 6 years, and we've spent a lot more of our time sort of looking at our processes for sort of, how we're actually working as participatory grant makers to do the work that, we're doing justice. For us, we always make sure that we're spending time with our panelists to sort of reflect with them on sort of what has gone well, what hasn't, and doing, some debriefs with them. We ask questions sort of around how can we make them feel like they have more control over the process if we were to do this again? And do you feel sort of you achieved what you had set out to achieve, and how could we have supported you better? And that has all fed into how we've learned and evolved our processes and practices over the last 6 years. And just sort of on that as well, we've run 15 different participatory funds over the last 6 years, and each one has been different. We haven't done them, all the same, because each fund, each community that we work with, and each sort of area that we're trying to tackle is unique, and we don't think that should be, a one-size-fits-all approach either. So just for example, we've moved towards paying people and increasing payments in line with sort of inflation, and making sure that we're being more flexible in how we recruit people as well. But also we've trialed different models of participatory grant making over this time, and we haven't always used the sort of traditional grant application model. Recently we moved away from one fund to remove sort of the competition and competitive element of participatory grant making, because that's an issue in itself for us. Grant making does exclude certain people from accessing funding, and it costs charities over £900 million a year to apply for grants. So we trialled a new way of using data with a panel to make sure that they were making decisions alongside their lived experience as well. And we've learned a lot about it, and that's in the toolkit as well if anyone is interested in how to do applicationless grant making within the work that you're doing as well. So just moving on to some of the practicalities, participatory grant making isn't just something that's nice to do, and for us, obviously, the values are really sort of the core pillars of how to do participatory grant making. But I think the really important thing is that we are making sure that we have the right skills within our organisations to be able to deliver the work and deliver the sort of more practical elements of participatory grant making. So the first thing that is sort of really important, obviously we've talked about sort of living the PGM sort of values as well, but having the sort of existing skills within your organisations to deliver the work. Sometimes we hear from funders that we don't have staff who have experience of participatory grant making, and I think just to say, neither did we 6 years ago. We were all new to the concept of participatory grant making, but it's all around sort of evolving your practice and resourcing it. But I think being aware of your internal expertise amongst your staff, and understanding sort of where there are maybe things that you're already doing really well, that you can continue to be doing, like participatory grant making. Much of the staff do things that traditional funders do as well, and would recognise, from sort of setting up the grant making systems to creating the forms, doing all the sort of operational stuff. We act as a bit of a PA to our panels, so we facilitate the meetings, gather the data, sort of do the evaluation, handle the queries from applicants. We have one-to-one coffees with them and make sure that we're supporting them to be applying, as well as all of the sort of financial stuff around sort of due diligence and making sure that people are paid as well. So I think that's an important thing, that you already have skills that can be used to get going sort of straight away. But I think where, as a small team, we have recognised there are definitely gaps within our sort of skill set as well. So we've partnered previously with other specialist organisations who can sort of help to fill that gap and supplement our knowledge as well. So, for example, we have previously worked with sort of youth services and disability specialists to provide sort of safeguarding support for our panels, where we didn't have that in-house previously. We have also worked with them to help us with recruitment as well, so they can reach particular communities that maybe we, as members of staff, don't necessarily have the networks. And so I think it's really helpful just to sort of do a little bit of an audit to see where you have particular gaps within skills in the staff team and internally as well. Just another example is that we have worked with an equality specialist now called BRAP, who help to deliver training for our panels around how to make decisions with sort of racial justice lens and an equity lens as well, which is something that, you know, was a gap within our experience as a team, and is something that we and our panels really value now as well. Another key thing is really around thinking like a youth worker. We're really lucky now that we do have 2 former youth workers, working at Camden Giving, but a lot of the skills that are needed for participatory grant making are really focused on those skills that we see, patience, strong communication skills, compassion as well. And I think that's definitely something that we really value. And for us as well, it's around sort of making sure that we have spaces and supports around trauma-informed practice and supervision as well. So I think for us, what you don't need, you don't need to be experts in participatory grant making. We see the experts as our community panels. I think it's a really important thing just to sort of take away that there probably are people within your networks as well who have that sort of lived experience of the issues that you're trying to overcome, and really just pulling them into the work that you're doing as well. Just checking how I'm doing for time. Some more stuff just around reaching communities, which we think is the really important thing to just get started on reflecting on, in terms of actually how you'll engage people into your participatory grant making process. Building referral partnerships is a really key thing for us. Like I said before, we've worked with specialist organisations who have been able to help to bring in particular residents from our community that we were often underrepresented in. And use data as well to guide your approach is another thing. For us, we recognised that we were underrepresented in particular areas of Camden, so we looked at this from a geographical lens and looked at, okay, we haven't got many representatives from communities within the Kilburn area, so we made more effort to go and sort of do targeted sort of outreach with organisations there, places that social places that they frequent, so that might be barbershops or places of worship, and schools as well. Demystifying the role to people is something that's really important. Providing resources that communicate what the role is really clearly, like participatory grant making. And grant making is a completely new concept for a lot of the people that we work with. So for us, it's really about using language and ways to communicate that's really accessible to people as well. Just for example, we have translated a lot of our flyers for one of our smaller funds as well, to make sure that we are able to sort of do more targeted outreach with specific communities as well. I think just moving on to sort of the last couple of points sort of around making sure that you're reassuring people that being involved isn't a burden. Sometimes people feel like this isn't a role for them because they don't have the experience of grant making, and for us we try as much as we can to communicate that isn't something that you need. We provide the training and support around that for them, but also sometimes participating in things like this might impact on their welfare, but we will always try and find ways around sort of paying them and compensating them in a way that is really accessible for them as well. So I'm just going to hand over, and I'm running over a little bit on time, so I don't want to spend too long introducing, but I'm going to just quickly hand over to Dan, who is our head of grants programs, who delivers all of our sort of participatory grant making funds at Camden Giving, to talk just a bit more around how he supports panels through his role. So I'll hand over to you, Dan.
Thanks everyone. So my mic says it's off, but I assume you can all hear me through Danny's because we're sat right next to each other. Don't let the backgrounds fool you. She's just got a whiteboard behind her where I'm by the brick wall. A lot of what I was saying sort of Danny's touched on, so I'll probably just elaborate on those examples. So starting with, people often ask me like how do we get panelists? So the easiest thing to do would be putting things online or putting things on Instagram and advertising the roles like any other roles. But what you do with there is you don't guarantee that you get people with the lived experience that you want on the panel. So the first thing I say to people is like, build your community network. And, you know, Camden Giving's been going for 6 years now. We've built ours, but, you know, we've built the networks with the community centres in the borough. We've built our relationships with the local disability charities, with the local LGBTQ charities, with the youth workers, with the jobs hubs advisors, and they're who we want to hear from. We want to hear from people who have lived experience relevant to the issues that people in Camden face. So once we have those relationships, we'll do as much as we can to facilitate trust between ourselves and the people who access those services. So that could be going down to a youth club and talking to a bunch of young people. It could be having a sort of freeway meeting with a youth offending worker, sort of myself and a young person, and just really breaking down what the role is and demystifying any barriers they might have to it, because it's unusual to be given positions of power. So making it feel as normal and as welcoming a space as you can. Then sort of once we've sort of got over that initial barrier of establishing a relationship, ensuring that relationship isn't extractive. Quite often people are asked to join things like youth boards or advisory groups or something that just feel really tokenistic. So that's like, I think, you know, Danny mentioned that we pay the London living wage, and that wage has steadily gone up. So we now pay £15 an hour, I should say, actually. So it's gone up with inflation. So it was London living wage when I started, and it's gone up. And there's a couple of reasons why that's really important. It's not life-changing money. If someone's on a panel, you know, 3 hours a fortnight for a year, or 3 hours a fortnight for sort of 6 to 8 weeks, it's not life-changing. But it does address the power dynamic in the room somewhat, in that I'm always paid to be in a panel meeting. So if they're not paid, there's already some, you know, additional power dynamics at play. How I refer to myself in the meeting is also like really key. So I always say that like I facilitate, because I have no voting power. Using the word chair, for example, automatically again throws power into it. But like, whilst it isn't a life-changing amount of money, we have like had people tell us sometimes what they spend the money on. And we know for some of them, it is a real lifeline. It does make a real difference between someone having just enough to get by and maybe be able to pay for something a bit more. So panelists recently told us, for example, it's what pays for her son's maths tuition, which, you know, on her income and her lifestyle, her son may not usually be able to have that sort of advantage in his life. How we pay people, also a question we often get asked is like, is it a job? Isn't it a job? How does that navigate around benefits and taxes? So we have a line in our agreement that we're compensating people in lieu of expenses as a result of participation, which we've been advised sort of covers that. For people who are on benefits and that they still feel very uneasy, we have been able to sort of pay people in vouchers or spread payments over smaller instalments, because there's often a cap on what people are allowed to have. And that would be the same if someone, for example, lived in supported housing, where if they went over a certain threshold, they'd be expected to pay for the housing, so things like that. And Danny did touch on this, but like it's been such a developing process. So like that £15 an hour is, you know, it's a reasonable hourly rate for most people. But for example, we had a panelist recently who has 3 children, and that wouldn't be enough to cover her participating and her travel, and to have a childminder for that whole sort of 4 or 5 hours. So that we actually cover her childcare costs. And that wasn't something we'd faced before. But that no barrier is so big feeling, like once you've built the trust, people can come to you with whatever their barrier to engagement is, we find a solution for it. So much more commonly that solution has been things like paying for taxis. So whether that be for young people who don't feel safe travelling in parts of the borough, or whether that be for people with access needs. So we've got a panelist in a wheelchair who gets about sort of perfectly fine by herself and is happy to leave by herself, but she likes to get a cab to the meetings because of just how long it takes to get sort of up and down lifts and having to judge journeys and stuff like that. So what would take you and I maybe a 25-30 minute journey across the borough, for her she'd have to allow over an hour for by the time sort of lifts don't work and a member of staff has to get a ramp every time she gets on a train, things like that. Yeah, on sort of that sort of inclusion stuff, it can go beyond the things you think of straight away, like taxis. It can be making sure every building has ramps, every building has lifts, and that you found ways that you can adapt your sort of applications. So, for example, ensuring everything can be sent in by video, or ensuring with one of our panelists who's partially sighted, I do like voice note recaps with him because he's heard things in the meeting, but he might not have been able to take notes or for whatever reason. So we recap things via voice notes on WhatsApp. And for a couple of our panelists, they have specialist IT programs. So for one of our panelists, she has something called, I think it's called Dragon Read and Write, where she can talk to the laptop and it will type for her. And for another panelist, he has one that magnifies everything, so he can read things in his own time, magnified. That does also like bring up a thought around how long it might take some people to go through applications, and being sort of really aware of that. So giving people, you don't send people sort of 5 applications to read the day before. Like, people have lots going on in their lives, so people always have like a weekend and some days to read something with us. And for people who have expressed to us that's not enough time, we'll find times to do some pre-reading sessions with them prior to that. So the panel itself, let's for example, happens on a Wednesday, maybe on the Monday prior, we meet up in a small group and do some note taking and reading, so they're going in to the panel feeling as prepared as everyone else who doesn't have any difficulties with their reading or writing or anything else. The next thing to think about is our cultural inclusion. So something we've begun doing a while ago that's been really well received is, once I've sort of met the panelists, is I will share the names of those panelists with everyone sort of we're working with, both internally and externally, with phonetic spellings of people's names, which for people who've never met someone, who've never heard someone say their name, I have the privilege of every time I'm meeting a group of panelists, I'm hearing them say their name in their introduction, so I know how it's spelt, how it's pronounced. But yeah, for everybody else, I've had really good feedback about that. We embed like prayer breaks into our panels. Diversity in Camden, you have a sort of a large Muslim population, and our panels are always representative of that. And in addition to our prayer breaks, we also pause for Ramadan, so that people don't feel that they can't take the opportunity because they know they won't be able to attend in the evenings when they're expected to break fast. So sort of remove the barrier before it becomes one. And then we also ensure that sort of food is culturally appropriate as well. Something that's developed quite a lot over the sort of last year and a half is like our pastoral support. So people use like lived experience all the time now, and I read in applications constantly, and I'm sure the rest of you that's involved in grant giving do too. But if you're going to get panelists with lived experience to read things that relate to their experience, it can be really traumatizing and triggering. As an example, our most recent youth funding one that's currently being decided now, one of the priorities is youth violence. One of the panelists, 2 weeks before beginning our panel, his older brother was stabbed. So for him to then read about youth violence, it's particularly triggering. So we've added trigger warnings to all of our applications. So if it's related to sexual violence, violence against women and girls, death, youth violence, things like that, mental health, it will come up with a trigger. That's really helpful for the panelists, but also for us. So our staff team is also full of people with lived experience who they might not want to read that at that moment of time, at 4:55, and they might want to give themselves some time. I would be in a room by themselves when they read it, as an example. And then what we do is we'll offer we'll explain what that trigger is before we read it, and then we'll offer check-ins back with people, and we give anyone the right to sort of not read an application and to leave a discussion if they'd like to. And then once people start with us, we the way we run the meeting, that sort of think like a youth worker a bit that Danny sort of mentioned. We'll really focus on that, building like a room that trusts each other and a warm room. And every time we come in, we'll do check-ins, and it will feel a bit like, you know, the icebreakers and trainings you've been on. But it's a really good opportunity as a facilitator to read the room and read how people are feeling. We create a values charter at the start of the process, which is some of the typical things you expect, like challenge the point, not the person, and that sort of stuff. But it might be more individualized depending on who's in the room. Allow like loads of time and space for people to share their personal experiences. If you've asked for a room of people with lived experience, when they're reading something about racism, they may go into a story around when they've experienced it. Thinking about sort of one of the young men we had recently, who is partially sighted. He had a like really negative experience with police a while ago, and every time sort of police are brought up, he brings up that. He also has autism, and he'll bring that up. And you've created an environment where both yourself and the rest of the panelists know how to handle that. The trust is there, and you know, you appreciate it, you value it, and then you move on.
I'm really sorry, Dan. I think we're going to have to. That's okay. I know there's so much to talk about, but I'm just I've been warned by Helen that we've only got 15 minutes left. But that just shows how much there is to talk about, and I think we'd really be keen to sort of follow on after today's session. So just on that, I'm going to hand over to Gabbi in a moment, who is from ShareGift. She's one of the donors that supports our work at Camden Giving. Camden Giving is an unendowed grant making organisation, so that means that we have to fundraise to be able to raise the money for our funds from businesses, local government, and other funders as well. Sometimes we know that influencing donors to sort of trust in the process and understand the importance of giving to participatory grant making can be a challenge, but I'm hoping that hearing from Gabbi today, you might be able to sort of take some things on board to then take away to your sort of supporters and your potential funders going forward as well. I'll hand over to you, Gabbi.
Thank you so much, Danielle. What time do you want me to finish by? Give me a number and I'll stick to it. Oh, I can't hear you now, sorry.
Oh, it's 5 minutes, okay, Gabbi?
Perfect, yeah, that's great, thank you. I was very happy listening to Dan talk through the approach to creating a safe space, because I've had the privilege of being able to attend some of the sessions that he's run with the panel of young change makers, and it really is a safe space. I wish all of my board meetings felt like that, actually. Okay, so on the first point, so why we took the approach to devolve funding through Camden Giving over setting up participatory grant making, I think I'll call it PGM, ourselves. Well, I think my view as a niche but relatively vanilla grant maker is that it would be quite arrogant to assume that we could become experts in PGM overnight. And one thing you will find when you research the subject, if PGM is new to you, is that there's such a depth of experience and knowledge out there already. You would be daft not to speak to people who are already doing what you are interested in. And so that led me to get in touch with Camden Giving. Having read their impact reporting, it really struck me that it's the holistic nature of the impact they achieve with their work. It's really quite different to the straightforward traditional view of impact in the charity sector. Talking about risks, because I think this is the one to really get trustee boards understanding. I mean, how you balance any perceived risks devolving funding through us. The word perceived in that sentence is doing an awful lot of heavy lifting, to my mind. The way we operate at ShareGift is to do our own due diligence up front before we put forward a proposed grant to our grant making committee. And the charities that we give to are identified through donor suggestions and our own research. So we're used to doing due diligence and assessing risk up front rather than putting that onto our grantees. So in a way, devolved funding forms a large part of what we do already. We give unrestricted funding as a point of principle, and we're cause neutral so that we can act on our share donors' charity suggestions. And part of the joy of that is that I get to go off and research areas like place-based giving and like PGM, and encourage my board to fund this kind of work. And really my interaction with the team at Camden Giving just reassures me that this is an absolute expert team, and they operate in a way that empowers grant making panels rather than disempowers. They hand over power, they hand over funding, and they put a really safe framework around people on those panels. And it should be no surprise as a result that you get really great funding decisions which go to the heart of issues that really matter to people in their community. So how do we aim to measure the impact of devolving funding? Well, as a grant maker and a funder of other charities, our impact is not measured in the traditional sense anyway. But what's important to me in terms of our direct impact as a grant maker is whether our practices are helpful or harmful to grantee charities. Danny mentioned earlier that applying for grants costs £900 million to the sector, which is an astonishing amount of money. And it's one of the reasons why we don't operate an application process. We help charities access share donation through other means. We also have no ongoing monitoring, because if you give unrestricted funding, essentially you are saying to the charity, it's fine to use that on your core costs. If you want to use it to pay your electricity bill, that's fine, because we recognise that you can't deliver frontline services without covering core costs. So we take that view. And then on the last point, so I'm wrapping up just in time, I hope. What funding in a neighbourhood means to us? Well, through our policy of giving to charities that are suggested to us by our donors, as well as identified through our research, we get loads of super local charities suggested to us. So hospices, food banks, PTAs, loads of really local organisations. So we give to hundreds of those every single year. And the pleasing thing about that is that because our donors are spread up and down the country, it means that our grants are as well. So they go to, not just to England, but to Wales, to Scotland, to Northern Ireland. And actually we have an arrangement with a funder in the south of Ireland who help us give to charities there too. I think the last thing I probably want to say on this is that I'm really delighted that this toolkit is being shared, because I think if you could clone the work that the team are doing and spread it up and down the country, it would be a better place to live. I think other grant makers can learn a huge amount from participatory grant makers. And that's why I'm so pleased to be able to talk today to other funders and encourage you to really engage with this kind of giving and to see the holistic impact that it can create. Okay, thanks very much, Danielle. I'll hand back to you.
Thanks so much, Gabby. I'm just going to quickly move us on now before the end of the session to do a bit of Q&A quickly with our trustee, Tom. I thought it would be useful just to do a little bit on this, because most of the time grant making organisations will need to get their trustees on board and to take the first step towards participatory grant making. And we know sometimes there are reservations and concerns sometimes that we're hearing from funders who are trying to break through that sort of red tape. There can be some nervousness around it because it is a new concept, particularly moving away from a more traditional style of grant making. But it doesn't mean it's not possible. We've seen it happen, and it'll be really nice, to hear from Tom about the things that you've experienced as well as a trustee of a participatory grant making organisation. So I have some questions that I will throw your way. So just the first one to get us started, from your experience as a trustee of a participatory grant making organisation, can you elaborate a bit more on the sort of benefits that you've seen and why you believe in participatory grant making as an approach?
Yeah, totally. And I just want to say, so much of what Gabbi just said really resonated with me. And I think it probably comes across when you hear Dan and Danny talk, just how I think they're very, very modest. And, what Camden Giving has done is be very, very principled led, those principles I talked about at the start, and then just look at this, like this participatory process and just iterate it over multiple panels. And it's really a deep understanding of the community and the issues of the community and how to support those people above anything else, that really, 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 really sets it apart. Look, for me, I think the core benefit is that we're making better funding decisions than we would do otherwise if it were people like me sat in the room making those decisions. And, I won't go into this because I think we've heard it already, but it really is a deep-seated belief that people with lived experience are better placed to make these decisions than people without lived experience. That's really the fundamental of it. There are benefits to panelists, I think, we've talked about economically, but also experience and everything like that. It's a challenging role, but there are benefits to panelists. I think there's massive benefits to our donor organizations, like Gabbi was saying, and I think the ability to access community in a different way, and actually really access community in a different way. And we see that with like local government, we see that with traditional funders, we see that with businesses as well. But yeah, the fundamental thing is really about making better funding decisions. I think from a trustee perspective, in addition to that, it frees us up to focus on other things. There is only a certain amount of time that I can put into Camden Giving, and instead of spending my time in grant meetings, we're spending it on things like strategy, on the finances, on the culture. So I chair an anti-racism working group where we're looking at, okay, well, how can we continue to try and evolve and create the conditions to address some of the inequalities that we're seeing as well. And so it just frees us up to really focus on other things that are actually supportive of the panels rather than like being very, very active in those decisions.
Thanks, Tom. The second question is, there's often a challenge from boards that participatory grant making processes pose a greater risk, and that those making decisions might make the wrong decisions. So how do you as trustees balance or address these risks?
Yeah, it's not a problem. And to go back to what Gabbi was saying, it's like it's perceived risk. It's perceived risk. So, I would actually flip this on its head, and I would say, look, our fund, what we need to make sure that the charity is solvent, that we're operating within the law, all of those sorts of things. Our fundamental obligation is to best serve the process of the charity, the purpose of the charity, and we're going to do that by making better funding decisions. So I'd flip it on its head and actually say, our primary risk is that we don't make as good decisions by taking a different path. We have had issues. So, we've had applicants complain about funding decisions. We've had applicants complain that the panel didn't understand. This has happened very, very rarely, didn't understand their applications, or we've had even people say, I don't agree with the model or whatever. It happens so rarely because the panels have got so much context that they make very good decisions. And when it has happened, we log those, we look at them. There's not been one instance where anyone in the staff team or in the trustee group have seen a decision that somebody has complained about and thought we would have made a different decision, or that's somehow there's some flawed logic there or anything like that. So to me, it's really it's a perceived risk rather than an actual risk, and actually that makes our jobs very easy in that respect.
Thanks, Tom. And just a really quick one to wrap us up. Have you experienced ever any challenges during your time as a trustee, and how would you have overcome them?
There's so many challenges in the evolution of the model, and I think Danny and Dan, you both and the rest of the staff team have just done such amazing work. You've talked about a lot of it today. For me personally, and I definitely found this working in an organization like this as a trustee, your desire to help, your desire to be like, I love this organization, I really believe in what we're doing, I want to help. You really have to be very, very aware of yourself and your presence and your involvement in things, and sort of just in a different way to you would in other organizations, I think, because it's very easy for that desire to help to actually start becoming like, oh, why don't we talk to the panel, so I think that's probably just one thing as a trustee that I'd think it's really good to have those very clear lines in terms of responsibility and governance and decision making, which Camden Giving provide, which actually make it quite easy as well.
Thanks, Tom. I think I will have to move on just to our final slide, if that's okay, without cutting anyone off. More than I already have today. Like I've said before, there's so much to participatory grant making that we just have not been able to squeeze it all in within an hour. But we would absolutely love for you to sort of pick up with us beyond today's session. I know that there's been lots of questions in the chat and the Q&A that I know Dan has been responding to, and we will take those away and get back to everyone individually after today's session. But just to let you know, obviously the toolkit is now live. It's on our website. Alongside that, we've got lots of free resources that we've pulled together from things like our training slides to help you to formulate your own, our conflicts of interest forms, our sort of interview questions and job descriptions, so that you can start sort of building up on your own sort of participatory grant making as well. We've also provided some paid advice and consultation as well to other funders, and we've supported about 15 other funders who are exploring participatory grant making approaches, and we are happy to come and do that with some of you if that's something that you want to reach out to us about. We work with our panelists because they are the experts. They'll come and join a member of staff to help advise on sort of how to implement participatory grant making within your own organisations as well. Like Gabbi, if there are people who are really interested in observing participatory grant making in person and want to join us as a funding partner, again, we are very happy to chat to people about that as well. And I just wanted to plug the absolutely amazing participatory grant making community of practice, which we were one of the sort of 12 initial organisations in 2020 to join it. It's a collective of individuals and organisations who are interested in sharing sort of their knowledge and practice. It's a really lovely space. There's more information on our website if you want to join. There's lots of Slack groups and peer learning sessions, and sort of it's a really amazing space to sort of come and be involved in to learn more about it as well. So I really just want to say thank you to everyone who's joined today and for connecting in with us. Thank you to all of our speakers as well. Members can obviously attend other sort of Festival of Learning sessions that are going on as well. Our friends at Islington Giving and Barking and Dagenham have one tomorrow that focuses more specifically on how to compensate panelists and some of the challenges that they see. So that's an hour session that will be really helpful to go along to if that's something that you're interested in. But just to end, we are doing a silent disco on Thursday at our lovely offices in Camden Town. If anyone is interested in coming to have a little boogie while listening to some music and sort of having a chat, if you're not interested in dancing, to more of the team and friends who are coming along, that is on Thursday the 18th of May this week from 6 to 8 p.m. and there's glitter booths and disco balls, but also some really friendly faces who will be there if anyone is interested. So I think a few minutes over, but thank you all so much for joining us today, and we look forward to carrying on our conversations with you after.
Thanks so much, Danny, and thanks to all the other panelists. We're only 3 minutes over, so pretty good. And thank you, everybody. Do follow up those links. And thanks, Dan. I think you've been responding to questions. So yes, we will wrap up. But thanks, everybody. Thanks to our panel.
Bye. Bye.